As always, thanks for joining us on Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Well, we're going to take a look at public higher education. There are about 80,000 students that attend these state-owned schools. But first, a couple of reporters on the big stories of the week. Back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, thanks again for joining us. We're going to chat with a couple of the state's leading reporters first about some of the big stories, and I'm talking with Tom Lehman. He's the Capitol reporter with WGAL News 8, and Charlie Thompson with the Harrisburg Patriot News PennLive. All right, Charlie, let me start with you. I tell you, this is a big season when it comes to elections. The House of Representatives in the state, every single individual has to either seek re-election or there's an open seat. We got half of the Pennsylvania State Senate, and we have a couple of other elections that you folks are following pretty closely.
Yeah, so we just passed a milestone date on the election calendar. Probably not one that a lot of viewers would be paying attention to, but for candidates, it's essential to meet this deadline when you have to file your papers to get on the ballot for the primary election.
Not easy, is it?
Otherwise you're forced to do a write-in campaign, and that's not that easy. So it kind of sets the battle lines for the election year to come. And we had the filing deadline passed this Tuesday. No big surprises in the presidential primaries. Nikki Haley registered to be in the Pennsylvania Republican presidential primary. Of course, between now and then, we'll see whether her candidacy is really still viable or not against former President Trump, who is also on the ballot. And
that's no big surprise.
Yeah. But then, another thing that I was looking at was just the filings for state Senate and state House, and basically, while there's plenty of unopposed seats because districts are politically safe for one party or the other, there's these chambers are close enough that it looks like we'll have a real barn burner again for control of the state House, and in the state Senate, where the Republicans have a pretty solid majority and only half the 50 seats are up. I detect a slight path for Democrats if they really want to dream big for them to try and take that majority for the first time in a long time, but really everything would have to break right for them. They'd have to pick up a seat in the Harrisburg area where Senator John DeSanto is retiring, and that is a Democrat-leaning district now, the way it's made up, but they'd have to pick that one up, and then they'd have to flip two Republican-held seats, one in the Erie area held by Senator Dan Laughlin, and one in southwestern Pennsylvania from Devlin Robinson. And those are pretty hotly contested districts by voter performance, but the incumbents are generally pretty hard to beat.
All right, Tom, I want to ask you about Donald J. Trump. He's been in this state, and the polls that get done, the Real Clear Politics average, the last time I looked, had Biden ahead just narrowly. And in the other battleground states, Trump does have a lead. But in Pennsylvania, it looks like in the Pennsylvania, as hugely important nationally, it looks like it could go almost any way.
Well, I think certainly the former president is hoping that it goes his way later this year. He spoke recently in Harrisburg, talking to a pretty packed crowd at the Farm Show Arena. And basically, if you've ever been to any of his other rallies or covered any other rallies, it felt very similar to that. He was addressing a crowd for the National Rifle Association, came out guns blazing, no pun intended, about gun control and pushing back against it, which obviously got huge cheers from the crowd. And he tried to frame the race as being around that particular issue. He also touched on a couple other topics, including that special prosecutor's decision not to prosecute President Biden over the mishandling of classified and sensitive documents. But he also did some of the stuff that he also likes to
Trump
talk about.
was being Trump?
You know, at one point he said that if he loses the election, they're going to change the name of Pennsylvania. So there were a lot of, you know, some of the more interesting things, we'll say, that he put out.
So we expect to see both Trump and Biden repeatedly back in the state, correct?
I'd expect you will see them in some capacity. Obviously, Pennsylvania's a battleground state. We've seen President Biden visit Pennsylvania a number of times already, essentially having kicked off the campaign season. And
he was born here.
And, you know, former President Trump, I wouldn't be surprised if he also spends a lot of time here as well.
Right, because let's not forget, as much of a swing state as we are, we also happen to be probably the biggest state in that swing state category with 19 electoral votes.
Exactly.
And as long as the Electoral College is a thing, I think Pennsylvania is going to matter.
All right, we have other big stories we're going to cover after we go to a break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, Pennsylvania is a politically divided state. We have a Democratic governor with Josh Shapiro, a Republican-controlled state Senate, and a Democratic-controlled House of Representatives. So almost anything can happen. And particular attention is going to be paid to the State House of Representatives, where at the moment the Democrats have, what, a two-seat lead?
Yes, yeah, two-seat majority. You know, stop me if you've heard this one before, but the House Democrats have managed to keep control through a very narrow majority after winning a special election. You know, this has happened a few times now because of resignations in their caucus, but the bottom line is they have this very narrow lead in the House. They just picked up a special election, Jim Prokopiak winning out in Bucks County. And the reason why that's important is because had they lost that seat, they, in all likelihood, would have lost control of the House of Representatives, which would have been, you know, huge for them. They had just won this majority in the last election, but also that could have had a lot of impact on Governor Josh Shapiro's budget.
Right, because, you know, Shapiro earlier this month introduced his $48 billion spending plan for Pennsylvania, which, you know, covers a lot of ground from
comprehensive is the word I use, right?
Reinventing public higher education.
And we're going to talk about
trying to, you know, provide more equity for public school funding. You know,
I thought it was a very ambitious agenda that covered a variety of subject matter.
Right. He's even getting into some cultural issues like let's legalize adult use marijuana for recreational purposes, and the skill games that have popped up in gas stations and little independent mini marts around the state.
Sure.
So, you know, that's kind of the table setter for state policy all year long, and you know, the legislature obviously has to pass it for the governor to sign it. So we are about to embark on this 4-month period of study and then negotiation that will lead to the budget.
But they still have to
who
get
has the seats, who has the
June
power
30.
seats at the table matters. Yeah.
And I think when you look at the budget and you look at the deal making that goes on to actually figure out what policies get passed, you know, especially in an election year when I think, frankly, a lot of lawmakers would like to have most of this stuff wrapped up before the election.
Sure.
This is going to be a time when you're going to see a lot of deal making get done. And if the Democrats control the House, that means they can continue to advance issues like gun control, raising the minimum wage, legalizing adult use cannabis here in Pennsylvania. And if they have that control, when they're negotiating with Senate Republicans over issues like private school vouchers or some of the regulatory
Is it
reform.
deal-making time?
Not quite yet, but I think we're, now knowing that the House is going to remain in Democrat control, that sets the lines.
Yeah.
And for all three of these parties involved, it's going to make things a little clearer.
It gets complicated.
Yeah, it's a good point that Tom makes. They know that they know that there's going to have to be give and take, and but I expect the Senate Republicans will. They see themselves as the defender of the faith. They feel like, look, we have every right to make our demands as much as you do because we've been elected and we're a representative majority sent here by the people.
But the ideological divisions are great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, they're very strong.
Right.
I don't have to tell you, you cover it every day.
Yeah, because even though we are a very much a political swing state, in the Republican camp and in the Democratic camp, there are more people who are more kind of in the extremes of those camps. And,
right.
So in the Republican caucus in the Senate majority, it's a more conservative caucus than it ever used to be. And in the Democratic caucus, I guess, progressives are finding more of a voice.
We're out of time. And we're going to talk about public higher education, which was mentioned. Will it be reformed? The governor would like to do so, and we'll chat about that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, in previous segments, we talked about public higher education and we're going to continue that discussion, which is pretty important. 80,000 students in institutions that are spread throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and they are very significant, not just because they educate about 80,000 students, but because of the impact they have on the regions in which they're located. Joining me to talk about that is Dr. Ken Mash. He's the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, usually referred to as ABSCUF. I think I got that right.
Correct. Thanks, Terry.
Where are you a professor at?
East Stroudsburg University.
And what do you teach?
Political science.
I can talk to him since we have a lot in common. All right, well, let's get into it. Governor Shapiro has proposed an overhaul of public higher education. What's that proposal about, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, so he has a pretty complex proposal that he's putting forward, which would increase dramatically funding to both our universities and the community colleges.
Right.
So there's a funding aspect to this, of which he wants more money to go through performance-based funding. As opposed to a straight allocation, so to try and keep universities accountable for graduation rates and things of that sort. The biggest aspect of the plan, I think, is the merger of the community colleges and the state system universities into one system. One system. Into one system. One
community colleges and the public universities.
Yeah, and that does make a lot of sense when we're looking at it purely from the perspective of the students, when we're thinking about pathways to success for students, that if you're taking courses at community colleges, you should know that those courses are going to transfer.
That's a good point.
And if you know, right now there has to be all these what they're called articulation agreements, and there's, you know, a ridiculous number of them. There is no system of community colleges, so it makes it difficult. And you should know also, I would think, that if you graduate from a community college, you've got automatic admission into one of the state's systems.
So it would be automatic.
Well, I don't know that that's definitely going to be part of the plan, but I would hope that that would be the case, that you would be guaranteed.
You take your 2 years and then just continue at one of the public universities.
Because it's one system, right? So that you should be able to move pretty clearly through that system. And he also has a program where he wants it for families with an income of $70,000 or less, that they shouldn't have to pay more than $1,000 for college, which is, you know, we've always advocated for the Pennsylvania Promise. It is admittedly more generous as far as the level of income and the amount of money that it pays out. But, you know, overall, it's a start. It's a, you know, it's great. I give the governor all the credit in the world for taking on this issue. It's been complicated for a long time. People have talked about all the problems in higher ed. And, you know, he is sticking his neck out and saying that he wants to get something done.
Yeah. Well, is there anything in the state budget that you would like to talk about? What do you want the legislature to do?
Well, you know, these things take time. If you're, even with the governor's plan, if he gets what he wants, we don't know how long it'll take. It would probably take several pieces of legislation to get stuff done. We're waiting to see what the details of that are. But at least for the state system, you know, we're waiting to see what the system is going to ask for. The appropriations hearings are coming up. We suspect it'll be around 6% increase that they're asking for, which is less than the 15% that the governor wants to give, which is desperately needed, too, by our universities. So we're looking for that kind of increase.
All right, let's run to a break and we come back. There's several other important topics I want to take up with you, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
Dr. Ken Mash, the president of APSCUF, is my guest for these segments of the show. We're chatting about some very important subject related to the state-owned public universities. All right, how about this? No strike.
Yes.
The professors at these schools and the coaches are not going on strike. Is that correct?
Well, the coaches are still in negotiations.
Explain that.
Yeah, so the coaches, so we represent two different bargaining units, the faculty and the coaches. The faculty have an agreement in principle, so we don't have all the language worked out yet, but we do have an agreement with the system, which means, you know, I haven't heard anything back from the faculty suggesting that they're not happy with it. Yeah, so I think a strike is highly unlikely. But the faculty, our coaches, in the meanwhile, are pretty close to a deal. They're concerned about job security for them, you know, to make sure that decisions not to renew their contracts not be completely arbitrary.
You mean we got to have football, basketball, baseball, all the sports that are pretty important to the universities?
They are really important, and student athletes are, you know, when they come to our universities, they're far more likely to graduate, you know, to stay, and to be loyal to the university.
Yeah, that's important. All right, when we talk about funding the universities, there's been a debate for some time about whether it should be based on performance. Right. What does that mean, and how would that work?
Right. So, you know, how it will work, or under the governor's suggestion, we don't know yet what that particularly means. And you know, we've been trying to work with the governor and express both our concerns and our support for his plan. But essentially, what it would mean is, you know, there's set expectations that enrollment will increase. that you will keep your students progressing along the way are some of the big things, some concerns for underrepresented populations, that they have opportunities at the universities. And it's not just for us, it's for all of public higher education. So that includes the state-related too, that he wants the additional.
And there is this big concern about affordability. Yeah,
there's a concern about affordability, and I may not like it, we may not like it, but there is among people in the legislature real concerns about accountability. And so, more and more states have been taking on performance-based funding or outcomes-based funding because they view it as a way to try and make sure that the universities are living up to expectations. There were also problems with this, as far as whenever you say, here's a formula and what you're, to get money, you're always going to have people try and game the system to get around it or figure out plans to get around it. So it has to be, if it's going to be done,
but there's a surplus in the budget this year, and Governor Shapiro's recommendation for the budget.
Yeah, so he wants to increase for the state system and the community colleges the budget by 15%. Okay. So that's a pretty big increase. So we're looking forward to that. What we would like to see is if they're going to use performance-based funding or outcomes-based funding, that there at least be a base amount that each university gets that they can count on, that's going to allow them to run their operations, and that additional money maybe.
One of the things that's not discussed very much, and you and I have chatted about it before, but I want to bring it up again, and that is these public universities spread out through the state are hugely important to the economy of the region in which they are located, providing jobs for people in the communities that wouldn't be there if the university wasn't there.
Yeah, they're extremely important, not just for the local community, but for the county as well. They're often the biggest employer in the region, and we could see that as enrollment has gone down, and we could talk about the cuts to public higher education. There's been some real impact in communities because there have been these cuts. So, this is about real people with real jobs, and, we need to make sure that we're looking out for all of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and this is a problem but the fact that they're that important is significant to the economy of the state as a whole, if you want to generalize more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we take away these universities, because remember that they're located in, not just in the big cities. In fact, we don't have a state system school in Pittsburgh. We don't have one in Philadelphia. We're talking about communities.
Some of them are in the suburbs, but a lot of them are in there.
We're talking about, in the northern tier, we have Mansfield University, Clarion University, Edinburgh. We've got Indiana University. These are communities that really depend on it.
Thanks for coming on. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.